The bank vault was still smoking from the dynamite when they walked in the third time. 3 times. The same bank. 6 days. The bank president looked up from his desk, saw the 9 armed men walking through his doors again, and something inside him just snapped. He started screaming, then laughing, then crying all at once, making sounds no human throat should make. Because this was impossible. This was insane. They'd robbed his bank on Monday, taken everything. Robbed it again on Wednesday after he'd restocked the vault with emergency funds from Phoenix. And now, on Saturday morning, here they were again, walking in like they owned the place, led by a man with a magnificent mustache and a smile that could charm the devil himself. The leader, the one who sat second from the right in the front row of their infamous gang photograph, actually had the audacity to tip his hat and say good morning, to ask how the president's week had been, to apologize for the inconvenience before announcing they'd come to make one more withdrawal. His name was Gentleman Vic Morrison, and what he'd just done was declare war on every lawman in Arizona territory. 3 robberies of the same bank in 6 days, each time taking everything, each time walking out untouched, each time coming back like it was all some elaborate joke. By the time they strolled out that Saturday morning with another $12,000 in stolen cash, the bank president had collapsed in his chair, muttering prayers, and the entire territory was organizing the largest, most violent manhunt the West had ever seen. Because you can rob a bank and maybe get away with it. You can rob it twice and become legendary. But rob the same bank 3 times in 1 week? That's not just crime, that's humiliation. That's a slap in the face to every badge, every law, every shred of authority in Arizona, and that kind of insult demands blood. Look at the photograph. 9 men posed in 2 rows, all armed with rifles, all dressed in their finest clothes, looking more like a gentleman's shooting club than the most successful gang of bank robbers Arizona had ever produced. The man seated in the front row, second from the right, holding his rifle with casual confidence. That's Vincent Morrison, better known as Gentleman Vic, and the magnificent mustache alone should tell you he was a man who cared deeply about appearances. Vic was different from most outlaws. He'd been born into wealth in New Orleans in 1852, son of a successful cotton merchant who'd survived the Civil War with his fortune intact. Vic had received a proper education, learned French and Latin, could quote Shakespeare and discuss philosophy. He dressed in fine clothes imported from New York, always wore a silk tie even during robberies, spoke with impeccable grammar, and treated everyone with elaborate courtesy, even while pointing guns at their faces. So why did a man with money and education turn to crime? Because Vic discovered something about himself in his early 20s. He was bored. Bored by business, bored by society, bored by the predictable routine of wealth and respectability. He wanted excitement, danger, the thrill of risk that came from dancing on the edge of death. He wanted to feel alive in a way that cotton profits and dinner parties could never provide. In 1876, at age 24, he walked away from his inheritance, rode west, and started robbing banks. Not because he needed the money, he already had money. He did it because he needed the excitement, the challenge, the pure adrenaline rush of walking into a bank with a gun and walking out with their money. And he discovered he was extraordinarily good at it. Vic brought organization and planning to outlawry in a way few had done before. He studied banks like a general studying battlefields. He memorized guard schedules, vault designs, escape routes. He timed everything to the second. He recruited his gang members carefully, choosing men who were skilled, reliable, and smart enough to follow complex plans without question. And he treated robbery like a profession, with standards and ethics, and a certain twisted code of honor that set him apart from common criminals. He never killed anyone if he could avoid it, said murder was the mark of an amateur who couldn't control a situation properly. never robbed poor people or small businesses, claimed there was no sport in taking from those who had nothing, only hit large banks that could afford the losses and had insurance to cover it. Always treated his victims with exaggerated politeness, as if robbery was just an unfortunate social interaction that required good manners to smooth over. The newspapers ate it up. They started calling him Gentleman Vic, and he loved it. It fed his ego, made him feel like a romantic figure rather than a common criminal, like he was playing a role in some grand theatrical production. He even started sending letters to newspapers after successful robberies, describing his exploits in flowery language, critiquing news coverage of his crimes, offering his philosophical thoughts on law and justice. By 1884, he'd assembled the Thunder Canyon Gang, named after their hideout in the remote canyons of central Arizona, and they'd become the most successful bank robbers in the Southwest. In 2 years, they'd hit 18 banks across 3 territories and never been caught, never even been close to getting caught. They'd stolen over $150,000 and made Vic into something approaching a folk hero among people who admired audacity. But 18 banks apparently wasn't enough. Vic wanted to do something that would make history, something so outrageous that people would talk about it for decades. And that's when he came up with the idea that would either make him immortal or get him killed. Rob the same bank 3 times in 1 week. Look at that photograph again. 9 men, all carefully chosen by Vic for specific skills and qualities. This wasn't just a gang, it was a criminal enterprise run with the efficiency and planning of a military operation. Standing in the back row on the far left is Samuel Quick Sam Porter, the fastest draw in the gang. Quick Sam had been a trick shooter in a traveling Wild West show before Vic recruited him. He could draw and fire 6 shots in under 3 seconds, hitting targets most men couldn't hit with careful aim. He'd killed 4 men in fair fights over the years and never lost his nerve under pressure. His job in every robbery was simple: be ready to shoot anyone who tried anything heroic. Next to him stands Thomas Whitaker, called the Professor because he'd actually taught mathematics at a college in Kansas before embezzling funds and fleeing west. The Professor handled all the gang's finances, kept detailed records of their robberies in coded ledgers, calculated optimal escape routes using complex mathematics that nobody else understood. He made outlawry scientific, provable, predictable. Vic trusted him completely because the Professor's mind worked like a machine. Third from the left in the back row is Marcus "Red" Callahan, a former Union cavalry officer who'd turned to crime after the war when he discovered he had no skills except violence and no desire for anything except excitement. Red was the gang's military tactician, training them to move like soldiers, to coordinate their actions with hand signals, to function as a disciplined unit rather than a mob of individual criminals. He'd fought at Gettysburg and brought those battlefield lessons to bank robbery with devastating effectiveness. Next to Red stands James Bridger, no relation to the famous mountain man, but carrying the name with pride anyway. Bridger was the gang's explosives expert, a former mining engineer who knew dynamite like other men knew their wives. He could blow a vault with just enough force to open it, without destroying the contents or bringing down the building. He'd lost 2 fingers on his left hand learning his craft, but that just made him more careful, more precise. On the far right of the back row is William "Billy" Sutton, the youngest member at just 23 years old. Billy was their lookout, their scout, the one who surveyed targets and watched for law enforcement. He had eyes like a hawk and could spot trouble from a mile away. He was also absolutely loyal to Vic, who'd saved his life during a shootout in New Mexico and earned the kid's eternal devotion. In the front row, seated on the far left, is Daniel Cross, a half-Cherokee tracker who could follow a trail over solid rock and find water in the desert. Cross handled their escapes, leading them through terrain where posses couldn't follow, finding hideouts in places that didn't appear on any map. He rarely spoke, never smiled, and could sit motionless for hours watching for pursuit. He was the reason they'd never been caught. Next to Cross sits Vic himself, second from the right, looking like a gentleman at a shooting club rather than an outlaw planning crimes. And next to Vic is Frank Morrison, his younger brother, the only family Vic had brought into the business. Frank was the gang's second in command, Vic's most trusted advisor, and the one who could talk Vic out of his more insane ideas. Usually, the triple bank robbery plan was one Frank had argued against, but Vic had overruled him. On the far right sits Patrick "Patch" O'Brien, a former Pinkerton detective who'd gone over to the other side after years of chasing outlaws, convinced him they had more fun and made more money. Patch knew how lawmen thought, how they organized manhunts, how they tracked criminals. He used that knowledge to keep the gang one step ahead, anticipating law enforcement moves before they happened. 9 men, 9 specialists, the most organized, most successful gang of bank robbers in the West, and they were about to attempt something that would either make them legends or get them all killed. The First National Bank of Prescott, Arizona was chosen carefully. It was the largest bank in the territory outside Phoenix, holding deposits from mining operations, ranchers, and merchants across central Arizona. On any given day, it had between $30,000 and $50,000 in its vault. Security was good, but not exceptional. 2 guards, a manager, a president, and a vault that Bridger assessed as medium difficulty. Vic spent 3 weeks planning the first robbery. The professor calculated optimal timing, Monday morning, right after the weekend deposits had been made, but before the bank could ship currency to Phoenix. Cross scouted escape routes through the surrounding hills. Red drilled the gang on their movements until they could execute the robbery in their sleep. On Monday, May 12, 1884, the Thunder Canyon gang walked into the First National Bank of Prescott at exactly 10:47 a.m. Vic led the way, dressed in his finest suit, tipping his hat to the female customers. Quick Sam and Red covered the guards. Bridger went straight to the vault. The professor held a stopwatch, timing everything. Vic addressed the bank president with elaborate courtesy, explaining that this was a robbery, that nobody needed to get hurt, that if everyone cooperated, this would all be over in less than 10 minutes. The president, a man named Harrison Wells, stared at the 9 armed men and wisely decided cooperation was his best option. Bridger set his charges on the vault. A muffled explosion. The vault door swung open. The gang loaded money into canvas bags. $23,000 counted quickly by the professor. 9 minutes and 40 seconds from entry to exit. They walked out, mounted horses that Billy had waiting, and disappeared into the hills while the alarm bells were still ringing. It was a perfect robbery, clean, efficient, professional, and it should have been enough. But Vic couldn't leave well enough alone. The second robbery. The territory went wild after the first robbery. Sheriffs from 5 counties coordinated their response. A U.S. Marshal arrived from Phoenix. Pinkerton detectives were hired. Posses rode out in every direction. The bank brought in emergency funds from Phoenix to reopen, hired additional guards, and installed a new vault. Everyone assumed the Thunder Canyon gang was long gone, celebrating their success somewhere safe. Nobody expected them to come back. On Wednesday, May 14th, just 2 days after the first robbery, the gang walked into the First National Bank of Prescott again. The bank president, Harrison Wells, looked up from his desk and actually didn't comprehend what he was seeing at first. His brain couldn't process that the same 9 men who'd robbed him Monday were standing in his bank again on Wednesday. It was impossible. It violated every rule of outlawry. You hit a target and moved on. You didn't come back. Vic tipped his hat again, apologized for the repeat visit, explained that they'd heard the bank had restocked and couldn't resist the excellent customer service. His smile was absolutely mocking. This robbery took longer, 12 minutes, because the new vault was tougher. But Bridger cracked it, and the gang walked out with another $18,000 while the stunned guards and customers watched in disbelief. The escape was harder this time. Pizzazz were already in the area from the first robbery. The gang had to fight their way through one roadblock, trading shots with the sheriff's posse. Nobody was killed, but it was close. They made it back to Thunder Canyon, but barely. Frank Morrison told his brother they should quit while they were ahead. The professor calculated that their luck was running out. Even Cross, who rarely spoke, suggested they lay low for a while. Vic overruled them all. He wanted to go back one more time. He wanted to do something nobody had ever done, something so audacious that it would be talked about forever. 3 times, same bank, 1 week. It was insane, suicidal. The kind of thing that would either make them immortal legends or get them all killed. The gang voted 5-4 in favor of the third robbery, with Frank voting against his own brother. But Vic had made his decision, and the Thunder Canyon gang was committed. The third robbery. By Saturday, the First National Bank of Prescott was the most heavily guarded building in Arizona territory. 12 armed guards, U.S. Marshals stationed across the street, sharpshooters on nearby roofs, a new vault that was supposed to be impossible to crack. Harrison Wells, the bank president, was sleeping in his office with a shotgun, waiting for the attack he was certain would come. The Thunder Canyon gang walked in at 9:15 a.m., right when the bank opened. They'd disguised themselves as ranchers making deposits, came in 2 and 3 at a time over 20 minutes, blending with legitimate customers. By the time the guards realized what was happening, all 9 gang members were inside with weapons drawn. Vic didn't tip his hat this time. He just pointed his rifle at Harrison Wells and told him to open the vault, or they'd blow it and him together. Wells, who'd gone 3 days without sleep and was running on terror and coffee, started laughing. That's when Vic knew they'd broken him. The vault opened. Bridger didn't even need explosives this time. The gang loaded $12,000 into their bags, everything the bank had left after the previous 2 robberies. The whole operation took 8 minutes, but the escape was a bloodbath. The moment they stepped outside, sharpshooters opened fire. The marshals charged from across the street. Guards came from every direction. The Thunder Canyon gang shot their way through downtown Prescott in a running gun battle that left 3 marshals wounded, 2 guards dead, and half the main street shot to pieces. Billy Sutton took a bullet through the lung and died in the saddle. Patch O'Brien was shot in the leg but kept riding. The rest made it to their horses and rode into the hills with half of Arizona chasing them. They'd done it. They'd robbed the same bank 3 times in 6 days. But the cost was starting to become clear. The manhunt. Arizona territory had never seen anything like the manhunt that followed. The governor offered $10,000 for the gang's capture. The bank added another $10,000. Private citizens and mining companies contributed more. Within a week, the reward reached $30,000, over $3,000 per man. Every lawman, bounty hunter, and desperate man with a gun started hunting the Thunder Canyon gang. Posers numbering in the hundreds combed the territory. The Army sent cavalry units. Pinkerton detectives coordinated the search with military precision. The gang split up as they'd planned, but this time the law was ready. They had that photograph, the one you're looking at, reproduced on wanted posters across 5 territories. Every face was known. Every member could be identified on sight. Daniel Cross disappeared into the mountains and was never caught. Some say he returned to his mother's people and lived out his days in peace. The professor made it to Mexico and reportedly died there in 1891. Quick Sam was shot dead in a gunfight in New Mexico trying to cross the border. Red Callahan was captured near Tucson after a 3-hour siege. He was tried, convicted, and hanged within a month. James Bridger died when a posse cornered him in a canyon and he tried to blow his way out. The dynamite exploded prematurely, killing him instantly. Patch O'Brien's wound went septic. He died of blood poisoning in a doctor's office in El Paso, screaming about the Thunder Canyon Gang with his last breath. Frank Morrison tried to surrender in Phoenix, thinking his brother's reputation might buy him mercy. He was sentenced to 20 years in Yuma Territorial Prison and died there in 1889 of tuberculosis. And Gentleman Vic, he vanished like smoke. The legend. Vincent Morrison was never caught. Despite the manhunts, despite the rewards, despite thousands of men looking for him, he simply disappeared. Some claimed he made it to South America. Others swore they'd seen him in San Francisco, living under a new name. The mustache shaved, the gentleman outlaw transformed into a respectable businessman. The most persistent rumor claimed he'd died in a shootout, with Mexican rurales in Sonora buried in an unmarked grave, his identity never confirmed. But no body was ever produced, no proof ever offered. The triple bank robbery became legend. Newspapers across the country ran the story. Dime novels embellished it. The photograph of the Thunder Canyon Gang was reproduced thousands of times, with special attention paid to Gentleman Vic, seated second from the right in the front row, the mastermind who'd pulled off the impossible. The First National Bank of Prescott never fully recovered. Harrison Wells, the bank president, resigned and moved to California, where he reportedly drank himself to death within 5 years. The bank itself closed in 1890, unable to rebuild its reputation after being robbed 3 times by the same gang. Look at that photograph one final time. 9 men who pulled off one of the most audacious crimes in Western history. 3 of them died violently during the escape or shortly after. 4 were captured or killed in the manhunt. 1 disappeared and was never found, his fate remaining a mystery that historians still debate. And Gentleman Vic? Second from the right in the front row, that magnificent mustache, that confident expression, that rifle held casually like a gentleman's walking stick. He sits there frozen in time, forever the outlaw who robbed the same bank 3 times in 6 days. Forever the mastermind who humiliated Arizona law enforcement so completely that they hunted his gang to extinction. Whether he died in Mexico or lived to old age under a false name in San Francisco, whether he escaped justice or found it in some unmarked grave, one thing remains certain. Vincent Gentleman Vic Morrison and his Thunder Canyon Gang did something no one had done before or since. They didn't just rob a bank. They declared war on it, came back twice more, and walked away with over $50,000 while making the entire territory look like fools. That's not just crime, that's art. Insane, suicidal, brilliantly executed art. And that photograph captures them at the height of their power. 9 men who thought they were invincible. 9 men who proved that even the impossible could be done if you had enough audacity, enough skill, and enough sheer nerve to try. The Thunder Canyon Gang, gone but never forgotten. Legends who paid for their legend with blood, bullets, and their lives. All except one, all except Gentleman Vic, who sits in that photograph smiling his secret smile, knowing something we'll never know, keeping his secrets even now, more than a century after he pulled off the crime of the century and vanished into history.